Heya Cryptozens, it's 10 p.m. Pacific time. My name is Nikodemus, and welcome back to the Crypto Overnighter, where we take a nightly look at the crypto, NFT, and metaverse space. And keep in mind, nothing in this show should ever be considered financial advice. And at long last, it is Friday, November 18th, 10 p.m. Pacific time, and welcome to the weekend. That is, if you celebrate weekends. One guy I don't think celebrates weekends much, Binance's CZ. The man is always working, it seems. And I expect he's been pretty busy lately because there's been a lot of discussion about the demise of FTX and what caused it. People want to know this reason or that. They went under because they were over-leveraged on FTT, or they went under because they were spending client funds or whatever. And to be sure, there are a number of investigations going on in the United States. Binance is scheduled to stand before the House Financial Services Committee in December on the subject. And at first, CZ said that Binance wouldn't be sending anyone to that hearing because they're expected to take a close look at Binance's actions during FTX's collapse. But there are questions about what happened to FTX in other countries as well. A number of members of UK's parliament have started their own investigation into FTX's apocalypse. They remain unconvinced. If you remember, we talked about it the other night. Lawmakers in the UK had a list of questions for Binance following a meeting held on Monday. And part of that hearing was about whether Binance had a role in FTX's collapse and what that role was. So Binance sent those UK MPs the answers to those questions. And apparently, the MPs are not pleased. Alison Thulis is a member of the Treasury Committee. She was speaking with Bloomberg when she said, quote, "It doesn't really give us the real background detail. I'm sure the committee will be asking more questions to get to the details of what happened here, because there are wider implications for this collapse and for the crypto sector as a whole." And I'd read that they're not very happy with the response to those questions. Binance sent them a series of news articles, which is almost insulting. It's the equivalent of, "Let me Google that for you." Far and away different from what they were expecting. Because they were expecting things like internal records. They were expecting to see documentation on how they arrived at the decision to offload of FTX's native coin. Now, Harriet Baldwin is another Treasury Committee member. Also in that same interview, she acknowledged that they had limited options available to them as far as forcing answers to their questions out of Binance. She said, quote, "We don't have much ability to push for more than we received." Meanwhile, Thulis indicates that she thinks the events around Binance and FTX will impact the committee's recommendations on future crypto regulations. But Binance is like, it's not like that. They've recognized the criticism from the lawmakers. They realized that the MPs were looking for greater insight into what happened. And they said they couldn't really be more transparent because they're cooperating with regulatory authorities. A spokesperson from Binance said, quote, "As explained to the Treasury Select Committee, we are unable to share any documentation in relation to FTX beyond the factual information we provided because the matter is subject to ongoing inquiries by regulatory authorities in a number of jurisdictions, with whom we are cooperating and sharing information on a strictly confidential basis." Now, all of this does carry some extra weight just now. UK lawmakers are putting together a series of comprehensive rules and regulations for digital assets. The Financial Conduct Authority is currently the ones in charge of making sure that crypto firms are licensed based on their compliance with anti-money laundering laws. Now, it's expected that once those rules are in place, the FCA will have greater authority over the crypto markets. Now, bringing this back to the United States, because more U.S. financial regulators have spoken up about the FTX fiasco. Kristen Johnson is one of the commissioners at the Commodities Future Trading Commission, and she was standing up for how her agency has handled digital asset regulation. Now, this is after we talked about Rostin Benham's comments last night. In this case, Johnson was defending her agency's record, saying that the CFTC doesn't have the authority needed to properly supervise the crypto industry. She was speaking at a Citi and Financial Global Crypto Conference in London when she said, quote, "CFTC lacks spot market jurisdiction for digital assets," plainly stated. And she, like Benham, cited the fact that FTX U.S. derivatives, formerly called Ledger X, they weren't included in the bankruptcy. And, like Benham, She cited that back when it was called LedgerX, they were required to put internal monitoring and other processes in place to meet regulatory requirements. She said, quote, "We have, right now, boots on the ground at LedgerX. We are directly and effectively monitoring on a daily, if not hourly basis, verifying what we believe to be the case, that every dollar of customer assets held at LedgerX are accounted for." She said the CFTC was walking a fine line as it was, given that they don't really have the power to force many companies to submit to their oversight. And part of that, she argues, is the lack of definition when it comes to digital assets. Summer Mersinger is another commissioner with the CFTC, and she also took up the question of whether it was time for more cryptocurrency regulation. She was speaking at a Texas blockchain event on Friday when she was talking about what effective crypto regulation looks like in the United States. She said, quote, "Lately, it's probably been 70 to 80% of what we talk about. We are clearly in a situation where we need to stop, we need to gather the facts, we need to understand what's going on to move policy forward." And she did say that she's seeing improvements in the process. Quote, "We are getting to the point that maybe we are past the education stage, and now it's the action stage. But it's an interesting political question because it isn't a partisan issue." She was also talking about the divide between the CFTC and the Securities Exchange Commission, because there are definitely differences of opinion on who is regulating what. She sounds confident that they can work it out. Quote, "There's a role for both. We just have to figure out how to make it work. Congress may have to say, no, you really have to work together, and here's when you're going to meet, and here's what you're going to talk about." And it sounds like real-time proof of reserves is on the table. She said, quote, "We expect that from our regulated entities. We don't ask for it every day, but we can, and I think that's fair. Maybe the control is decentralized, but you take customer funds and you put them in this central location that the regulators know about and see and can check." She continued, going on to say that until the feds reach some sort of decision, it continues to fall on the states. She said, quote, "Sometimes in Washington, we forget that the states are the first actors and the first regulators here, and that they play an important role. I think a lot of times states get left out of the conversation, and that's unfortunate." Now, this whole case has led to something of a regulatory pickle, you know? They're deliberating what happened to FTX in Congress. But FTX isn't based in the United States. FTX's main operation is in the Bahamas, which really is causing its own issues, because now there are competing bankruptcy processes, one in the U.S. and one in the Bahamas, which has had a direct effect, because we now know that the Bahamian version of the SEC did indeed confiscate funds. I guess confiscate is the best term. So here's what I mean. The Securities Commission of the Bahamas announced that they ordered for the crypto in FTX's wallets to be handed over to government-controlled wallets the previous week. They claimed that it was necessary for them to do so to protect their clients. They said that they were acting under an order issued by the Supreme Court of the Bahamas when they seized FTX's digital assets. They said, quote, "Urgent interim regulatory action was necessary to protect the interest of clients and creditors of FDM." So remember, shortly after FTX filed bankruptcy on November 11th, now, it's important to note that that filing was in the United States and specifically did not include FTX digital markets in the bankruptcy. Now, remember, after that bankruptcy filing, it looked like FTX was getting hacked, right? Because hundreds of millions of dollars of crypto went from FTX's coffers to the wallet of the state. They said, quote, "A digital wallet controlled by the commission for safekeeping." So analysts were saying some $633 million worth of crypto was drained, with 477 of that expected to be stolen. Well, that turned out to be false. And this decision to confiscate the money from those accounts came just 2 days after they decided to freeze FTX digital markets assets, suspended their registration so they couldn't do business in the Bahamas anymore, and they stripped FTX's directors of their power. And so the whole thing is just kind of odd. SBF filed for bankruptcy Chapter 11 protection on November 11th. Now, on the 15th, after the Bahamas took all the money from the FTX wallets, Then FTX Digital Markets files for bankruptcy Chapter 15, and they did so in the Southern District of New York, not Delaware, which is where the rest of the companies filed. Genesis Block is a cryptocurrency exchange based in Hong Kong, and they seem to be yet another casualty of FTX's implosion. They said fallout from FTX is the final straw after a year of winding down services. Instead of being the front runner to provide retail crypto services in Hong Kong, Genesis Block announced that they were shutting down operations and ceasing trades. They sent out a letter to their customer. In their letter, they gave December 10th as the date that they plan on sunsetting their OTC trading portal. Winston Hung is CEO of Genesis Block, and he said that the company has ceased trading due to the turmoil from FTX. He said, quote, "So we would rather close out our positions to regain some of our liquidity." That said, their website is still up, and they still have a section for customers interested in OTC trading, but it's just like a help file for information only. Genesis Block has asked their customers to get their funds off the exchange, and they're no longer accepting new signups. That said, sources say that Genesis Block began winding down services earlier this year, and they cut ties before FTX imploded. And in addition to their OTC trading, Genesis Block also ran a Bitcoin ATM network. They sold that network and its 29 nodes to a third party this year. And this is Genesis Block. This is not the same Genesis that's causing a problem with Gemini's Earn program. Genesis is an institutional trading company that has $175 million locked up on FTX. So it's a different company. And finally, let's talk about Kroll. Kroll is a restructuring administration firm. Kroll Restructuring Administration is a subsidiary of Kroll LLC. Now, Kroll LLC is one of the world's largest corporate intelligence firms. And FTX has hired Kroll to track all of the claims against them. They're also responsible for identifying interested parties of developments throughout the bankruptcy process. Kroll is also known as a claims and noticing agent, and they were appointed to the role last week on the 12th. Now, their job is to keep track of all of the claims against members of the FTX empire. Right now, there's only 8 claims in that database. And these kinds of agents are commonly used when the claimants number 1,000 or more. With an estimated 1 million or more potential creditors in this case, I expect that database to grow significantly in the coming months. In addition to claimants, Kroll has a list of interested parties. These are people or entities that want to be kept updated on developments. This list, already over 750 parties, does not include customers. It's more things like banks and landlords, regulators and insurance providers, as well as individuals. Stephen Curry is on the list, as well as Wells Fargo, Chainalysis, Circle, and JP Morgan. And I think that's going to do it for us tonight. I want to thank you, my listeners, because when you stop listening, I will stop talking. We'll see you tomorrow night.